This is the TK Radio Network.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
If you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
What difference at this point does it make? Does it make? Does it make?
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
Hey, well, thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Trust But Verify, and we really appreciate everyone, especially our chat room, for their weekly contributions. I don't know how we could do this without you. And, here at Trust But Verify, I guess we're all from Missouri. Does anyone know where the state slogan for Missouri came from? Paul, do you know?
Yeah, I'm usually pretty good with obscure trivia, but I do not.
It's probably the only time I'll get you. Okay. Okay, in the immortal words of Congressman Willard Vandiver, he said, I come from a state that raises corn and cotton, cockleburs and Democrats, and frothy eloquence neither convinces nor satisfies me. I'm from Missouri, and you got to show me. So anyway, that pretty well sums it up, especially here in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Angela's going to be here soon, I think. We're having a little bit of a technical problem with her microphone, but we'll get her in here pretty soon. And Paul, how are you doing?
Well, other than being struck down with our usual spring cedar fever fest, I'm doing pretty good. I had jury duty yesterday and was not called onto a jury, so that was always a good thing. And I only spent half a day downtown with the unwashed masses.
Yeah, I think when you're sitting there tying a noose in your seat, that'll probably get you off most times.
Yeah, the nullification T-shirt, I think, scared him off. Maybe hashtag nullification. At some point in time, we got to talk about jury nullification. That's a big deal. I mean, I really wish more people knew about it, and that it played a larger role in our court system. But I was trying to get somebody from the Texas group to come on, and I got nullified. They haven't been willing to show up yet. But it's. Well, I picked up some obscure trivia yesterday. The judge was talking to us before swearing everybody in, my county in Texas, Dallas County, is roughly 2.5 million people, which I found interesting. It's bigger than some states, the average turnout when they send out the jury summons is only 15%, and we have the highest turnout rate in the state of Texas. The average county only gets 7 to 8% people responding and actually showing up for jury duty. So,
how do you not show up? They'll come. I mean, they'll come and get you or find you or something.
Yeah, and they explain to us how they will come and send a constable to your place of work or your home and drag you into court, and it's about $1,000 fine. So, apparently, there's a lot of bold people out there.
It's not worth it. I mean, I get kicked off every time anyway.
Yeah, it's too easy to show up and act crazy or usually knowing that you have a subscription to say Soldier of Fortune magazine. That's usually or any opinion at all on anything. That's usually get you off the jury right there.
I was called a 2-3 months ago, and I thought I was hammered because there was not that many people there, and I was
7 to 8%.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sitting there, and fortunately, I heard this guy was a perp. I guess he was stalking someone, and they filed charges on him. And anyway, I heard a lady behind me that was also a potential juror talking about how the guy had accosted her out in the parking lot one time. This is a small town, This is Gainesville, Texas. So I took that straight to the judge and said, you know what? I just heard this guy's done this more than once. I just don't think I can be fair in this. And I got out. Now I would have gotten out, if it was something important, but I figured that guy was fried anyway. Anyway.
Yeah, I had one where I got called and got questioned. It was a DWI case, and they asked me if I could be fair and impartial. And when I told them that a close friend of mine had recently been killed by a drunk driver, they said goodbye to me pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't like people with any kind of close experience to anything. Well, I hear sounds. I don't know if Angela's chopping her way into the studio or they've got.
I'm here. I can't. I'm all stuffy, but I'm here. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're stuffy. Your brain's still working, right? I don't know. What have you been thinking?
I don't know. That's debatable at this point. How are you? I mean, obviously, I walked in on the jury selection conversation, and I'm kind of jealous because I want to be part of jury selection. I've never been asked to. I've never been summoned.
How can you? I know you're registered to vote. I don't know what your selection criteria is in your state, but Texas isn't. I think if you're registered to vote or have a driver's license, I don't know what it is, but anyway, they get me pretty often.
I thought it was registered to vote, but I mean, I've never been. I find that would probably be a fantastic place for me to just be really obnoxious but and as Sparky likes to say, if you introduce wrong data to me, I freak out, and I just think that would be a fabulous place for me. Anyway, so.
Well, I think you'd be a good juror. I think you'd be fair. You'd be fair and impartial, just depending on what T-shirt the person was wearing.
I think she's waiting to be on jury duty for my trial.
No, I'm going to be on trial.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the only law says she doesn't have to testify against it. Yeah. It doesn't say she won't testify against it.
Anyway.
Well, we got all this stuff going on, and we've talked about this a few months ago, and we touched on it from time to time about automation and what's going on. And I'm an old guy, and I've watched processes happen, over time. I watched the advent of the computer, and we talked a little bit about that, and the home computer and the internet, and you see these things, and they, once R&D takes off and a market develops, crazy things happen. Somebody goes to space, and the next thing we have is Teflon. So you have all sorts of pressure right now on industries. China's going nuts over there because they're falling behind, in their competitiveness. So, and they don't really, I guess they're buying up some robotic companies. They only have like 1% of the robot manufacturing that's in the world, probably the only thing they don't have. But anyway, they're displacing a lot of people. I was just looking here in my little cue card, and a Taiwan company just replaced 60,000 workers with robots. That's a lot of folks out of work at one time.
Well, yeah, but Foxconn, they were like jumping off the buildings and committing suicide anyway, so it was just a matter of time. And 60,000 people in China is like, 30 here. Just saying.
It's a small. They're it's just kind of an odd term they use, robot penetration into the workforce.
Yeah, I'm like a 13-year-old right now.
There's some not be able to get that out of your mind for a while.
Yeah. Automation apparently is across all industries.
Well, going back to the Foxconn thing real quick, Skipper, you're aware, like when Apple had they were doing all the Apple products over there, and literally people were killing themselves en masse at the Foxconn factories.
It was actually to the point where they put up those safety nets around the building so that you couldn't jump off the building.
You had to jump twice that way.
You had to get a good running start to get over the net. So,
well, it's a lot of pressure. But, I can remember stories about people committing suicide in Japan, over the years. It seemed like there were a lot of stories back in whatever decade that was, 80s or 90s, or people just couldn't handle the pressure, and probably a lot of that had to do with, of course, they're used to overcrowding there. Maybe it's not overcrowding to them, but, it's a whole matter of honor, and if they got fired or something, they were out of there one way or another. They weren't going home.
Well, in Japan, too, mothers used to help their sons commit suicide if they didn't get into the right college and stuff. It was an honor or family dignity thing, so that's really...
Was that when they turned 13? Because we toyed with that a couple of times.
You know... We're going to table that conversation and move on a bit. So.
A little too close to home there.
That's when you apply the concept of Bushido to your career.
Yeah. Well, we talked. Well, I think we mentioned this last week about the Silicon Valley elites. They're getting bunkered down there because they see this coming. And I read an article sometime this week on people buying huge swaths of land in New Zealand and being interviewed saying, "Oh yeah, man, if it gets really bad, we're going to get in our jet and we're going to go over there and live in our in New Zealand because it's not as crazy there as it is here." But they're anticipating something, and I really believe there's something on the horizon. And Sparky, you can jump in any time you want to, because I know you think that something will happen that will, begin to fill in the void where these jobs are. At least we had that conversation. Maybe I convinced you otherwise.
Not really.
If anybody, I don't think anybody changes his mind. He's very set in his own.
Call it deaf to the voice of reason here in Texas. But anyway,
I don't want to give the impression that he's unreasonable. He's just likes his own reasoning. So, anyways,
it's my alternative facts.
I interrupted. Sorry.
Well, you have a sort of silver lining opinion about this, that this has happened. Here's my concern, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because I sort of have an outline here, but
I do. You're right.
Things have to happen, for that to work. Things have to be in place before it happens.
The marketplace is a remarkable animal. It is very organic, and anytime you inject something inorganic into it, the organic organism will adjust. But that being said, if we displace workers with automation, the displacement itself will produce other opportunities that we will move into. And to give you an example, it's a classic example of the tire replaced the wagon wheel. Oh my God, we're going to lose all these wagon wheel makers, but they just go into something else. Granted, you need less actual labor to produce the newer technology, but the technology itself also produces other opportunities, and it's always in unpredictable and unforeseeable ways from where we stand now. In hindsight, we'll be like, oh yeah, well that just makes sense.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But even in the most extreme scenario, and by most extreme scenario, I mean every job on the face of the planet is replaced with automation. Even the robots are being built by other robots, and even the design of the robots is being designed by a robot. If every job in the planet were filled by a robot, then the cost of goods starts to approach zero. So, okay, that gallon of milk will no longer cost $2.58 or $3.78. It will cost zero because the automation does it at no cost. So the fear of losing your ability to support yourself also diminishes with the need to support yourself. You could almost say that absolute automation will be the final communist utopia, I guess. You just have to remove the whole government aspect of it. But
the government aspect and the greed aspect.
Sure.
Look what's happened so far. Is I remember NAFTA, and a little quick trip down memory lane. We were told that NAFTA was going to be such a good deal because, for example, I used to have a Chevy Suburban. I really loved that car. And they were told that they were now going to start manufacturing Chevy Suburban south of the border. That was going to drive the price of them down. Well, it didn't. They set up their factories down there, and they started cranking them out. And guess what? Prices went up. And they said, well, they went up because of the EPA. Well, they didn't go down. All the money they saved with their $1.50 an hour
Well, that's silly. So are we paying the robots?
Just when the robots thought they had it good. I got that guy's job. Now we're going to tax them. Yeah, that's the theory.
So we're paying I just want to understand. We're paying the robots
$0 an hour, but there'll be a minimum tax on each robot. So who pays the tax? Which means that the products will not approach the cost of zero.
Well,
exactly, and that's the point. It's not going to go to zero because the corporations that own the manufacturing are going to be paying that tax.
And if you have people who are getting a minimum wage, in the sense of this basic living wage that they determine, the economy is pretty much based, globally on consumerism. So what happens if you got enough money to buy your milk and your bread, but you don't have enough money to go buy, your giant cheap TV, you're going to be idling factories.
And that's going to play right into something you're going to be covering later, with that sharing economy. Because, I don't want to get ahead of myself again, but, you can see where, if we don't all own a bunch of stuff and we're sharing it, then demand goes down, right? Isn't that the way that works?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
The basic,
less goods need to be produced.
The basic wage, the effect that basic wage has on a society can be very well illustrated in any inner city where they have a basic wage. Now, it's a demotivating force which takes a person who would otherwise have motivation and ambition and demotivates them, because human beings will accept a lower state of condition, meaning you will live a little bit less comfortable if you don't have to work for it. And so that demotivating factor in not having to work for your basic needs. Have you ever known somebody that had to go on workman's comp? They get injured and they have to go on workman's comp.
Of course.
I've known people who have gotten injured, and it's almost textbook every single time when they get injured. They want so badly just to get back to work, to get back to being productive. And after about 2 years of being out of work because of their injury, the light goes out in their soul. And they just become complacent and accepting of the check they're receiving. And that's what basic income does to a human being. It puts the light out.
Well, there's Angela, go ahead.
I don't know. It just feels like we're talking about multiple levels of something here. It's like it's a disjointed conversation, because over here we're talking. I don't know. It's just over here we're talking about or a basic level of wages, and somehow we're taxing robots. But over here, he said, I don't know. There's a disconnect in here I've been trying to chew on for weeks. And I see where you're coming from, Skipper, and I see where Sparky's coming from, and I hear both sides of it, and I read both sides of it. But there's a disconnect here that I can't quite articulate yet. But it will come to me. But there will always be jobs that robots won't do. Period. There will always be people that don't want to do jobs. So, and there will be jobs that will morph and will modify. And you look at stuff like in the 80s, and I don't know. I do a lot of my referencing by TV shows because there's just TV on in the background. But has anybody watched *Halt and Catch Fire*? It's actually a really kind of an interesting show. It's about the rise of the personal PC and just the computer industry as a whole in the 80s. And it started out in Texas with Texas Instruments and whatnot, and they moved to Silicon Valley. They're migrating out west now. And they have these dumb computer servers that were sitting there all night. The staff left at 5. The computers were all shut down. And from 5 at night to 8 in the morning, they were just closed. And somebody said, we should turn these into server farms. And so there's always something that you don't see right now. Something will always come. There's a new idea over here. There's a person over here that's going to come up with something that none of us were ever going to think of. So I don't see that the human condition is only going to be left to the wealthy. I don't see that the human condition there are going to be those that lay down and just will work the system and do a lot of freaking work to get their $1,000 a month. I seem to be related to half of them. If some of my family members put as much work into a job as they do of getting their benefits, they would be the most productive human being on the planet. So there's always going to be people that will be content to do nothing, but there's going to be the rest of us. I can't see Sparky, for example. I mean, he'll lay here some days, all like on a Sunday, and just play his little game or whatever all day, and that's fine. But as a general rule, I don't see him stopping. And I don't think, and Skipper, you could stop right now, but look how much effort you put into this radio show. So there's always going to be something that people will do. So I'm not sort of articulating what I want, but I don't think we are going to stagnate as an entity, as the human race, because of robots. There'll just be something more.
Let me. And I think one thing we're completely glossing over here too is we're talking about current state versus future state, and there's the middle ground, and that's to me where the pain lies in this process. When you're making that transition, and you have massive numbers of workers who are unemployed or underemployed, and there's nothing to replace them yet, or the ball is rolling slowly, and you're going to have a lot of disaffected people. To go back to China, automating and roboticizing, their factories. They've got this huge pool, probably the second largest pool of cheap labor, in the world after India. They would, really face massive civil unrest if, 1 billion people don't have anything to do. Yeah. I mean, and we're replaced by robots. Okay, they're not jumping off the building. That's great, but instead they're throwing themselves in the river because they have nothing to do. They're bored out of their minds. And I agree with you, Angela. I mean, there's some segment of society that's like, great, I'll sit on my ass and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. But I think the vast majority of society, whether they're incredibly highly motivated or even middle of the road average motivation, they're going to get bored. And they're going to, and riots may be a way to relieve boredom. The civil unrest, I think, and to me, the Chinese especially are, by automating too hard, too fast, they're cutting their own throats. At least the regime is.
They're in a catch-22 over there because they have to automate, whatever you say it. They have to because they're losing ground. And in the course of doing that, they have to, put a lot of people out of work. And it's going to get worse. I mean, they're already saying.
Everything in China is already nationalized. And I don't know how much stuff that you guys get from China, but, like our daughter, a lot of stuff from her will come from the Asian countries because of her anime and whatnot. And I get, a lot of the stuff that's coming from Amazon, you can get the cheap knockoff Chinese version of the faucet, or you can get the better one, so on and so forth. And then there's this little Wish site. They send stuff over, but to send it back is literally like the faucet we got. I got it for $67, and it didn't work right. To send it back would have been $180. And they basically subsidized their own shipping because they put these people in these little factory jobs, and it doesn't even matter. They just have to keep those people busy. So this push, I can see in some areas where they're absolutely going to go to automation and robotics. Obviously, they're not going to. But there are some areas where they're going to keep these little Chinese people busy, doing their little menial jobs every day, getting their government health care and their government mandates of what they can eat and how many kids they can have. They're going to have their lives very well regulated. They are not going to do an immediate push over into basically a new universe for these people. And as we've talked about in the past, and Sparky always likes to bring these up, the abandoned cities. They built these mega cities that they never moved into. So
right, and the ghost cities. So you can find them all over YouTube. In fact, I was just going to bring that up. I mean, I think that's a perfect example of. I mean, it's make work.
Exactly.
And there's only so far you can take that. I mean, sooner or later, the entire country is paved over and full of empty skyscrapers.
China's they're a hybrid. They have capitalism that pretty much drives the economy. And they have this make work, if you want to call it socialism, communism. But it's getting more difficult. The more pressure that's placed on industry to be competitive, the more capitalism is going to win out, and the benefits are going to go the other direction. Right now, robot penetration in the workforce in China is only 36 out of 1,000 workers. That's not bad, 3.6%. But if you look at the world market for industrialized robots and just look at the the level of change. In 2009, there were 60,000 industrial robots purchased. Just 6 years later, 248,000 purchased. That's a big change, 60,000 to 248,000 in 6 years. And that was 2015, and we have no idea, know what it was last year or what it's going to be next year. But once again, my concern is that it is a tsunami, a snowball, whatever you want to call it, is coming, and they're not ready. Here's the thing. Getting back just for a second to the universal income, they looked at this in Europe and looked at it in France, and they said, we can't do it. It'd add an extra 22 percentage points or take 22 percentage points for French GDP. It's impossible. We cannot afford to pay everybody this what I would call make work salaries. Now, if I were going to plan for this and I were in a position that I deserve to be in over the entire universe, I would start right now. I would say we need to completely revamp our public education, K through 12, and get people ready for this and start thinking in a completely different way, because the future is not going to look anything like the past as we see fewer and fewer job opportunities coming up. Now, this is my opinion, but it's pretty much borne out by all these articles I'm reading and all this present change and future projections. But let me give you something. I got really excited today. I thought, hey, the Brits are doing at my age, that can be dangerous. It's you get the 9-1 dialed and you just wait. You're going to dial the other one. But anyway, they decided we really need to look at our university, our education system in Britain. We got all kinds of things happening, and so I don't know. Ernst & Young, that's they decided that we're just going to remove the requirement for a degree classification from people that we hire in our accounting firms. We've decided that the university education is not a good predictor of how well someone's going to do in a professional field. So far, I'm nodding my head in the right direction. I'm going, yep. In fact, they said no evidence that success at university is linked to achievement in professional assessments. Okay, so that sounds good, but instead they're saying that the company's going to use numerical tests and online strength assessments. And I thought, okay, well I could probably draw up one of those tests to find the kind of person that's going to be, do a good job. Well, that's not what you're looking for. It turns out that they're hiring values-based people that have values-based leadership traits, citing empathy, emotional intelligence, and resilience as key assets in new recruits. And the universities are going, well, we need to teach more hand-holding and kumbaya singing. And what these employers are saying is, look, we've been testing people, and the brightest people are getting their education in these areas. So we need to start looking for people in those areas. I have two comments about that. One is, what are those kumbaya singers going to do when they have to sit down there with a ledger, and start doing accounting for a Fortune 500 company? How are they going to respond to that? And how in the world are they going to be able to emotionally adjust to that kind of an environment?
This is a conversation that I think at least the Gen Xers, my age group, was looking at these millennials with their women's studies and their black studies and their this studies, and they were sold this bizarre notion that as long as you had a college degree, it didn't matter what it was in, you were going to get these great jobs. So go spend $60,000 a year to study about cranky women in their vajayjays and their proud abortions, and there's no job market for these people. So of course, if Mike Rowe has been touting it for years, and I know Hatch is a big fan of Mike Rowe, we're not teaching any valuable skills. And yet I know you're talking about England, but this is going to be universal, because we went into this bizarre, touchy-feely, everybody's got to feel good about their life choices, regardless of how pointless and ridiculous and expensive they are. So I think, and I've always thought this since I was a kid, it never even occurred to me that I was so conservative when I was thinking these things, but apprentice programs and learning trades, and the trade doesn't necessarily have to be a welder, but an accountant, as far as I'm concerned, is a trade, really. It is a skill set. It's not anyway, so we need to make our young people more valuable, and the college settings for all their money are not doing that. And I think as parents, we need to step in on that.
Well, you do, and then there's just what can you do other than homeschool? Paul, what were you going to say?
I've worked for Fortune 500 companies, and specifically to go to accounting. The computers do most of that. The people are, data entry, or they're doing some kind of, analysis of what went wrong with the data entry or, the computer program. So, it kind of makes sense, from that perspective that, you don't need a college degree. Because you don't need a college degree to do data entry. You're taking something from, paper to, a digital format. However, there's a theory, I don't know the name of it, but basically it states that, and it's held true over the last several decades for sure. The more technology you have, the faster you acquire new technology. So, even that data entry operator is going away to some degree because you have OCR technology now, the optical character recognition. You can take a piece of paper and feed it through a scanner, and it can read that paper and based upon its programming, make a judgment of where the information, the data on that paper needs to go in the computer system. So. It's really, it's a really highly complex, interrelationship, I think between all of this stuff. And I have to go back to, I think the transition, which is, I think we're, at the beginning of, or, some small percentage of the way into the transition, from, what we're used to and, the historical concept of work to the, the brave new world of work. I think there's a lot of pain heading our way on this.
I do too. Go ahead, Angela.
No, I was going to say I do too, but can't we say that looking back at any generation? My daughter brought this up today. I'm like, we live in the future now. It's just amazing to me, and this is changing. And that's changing? And then she said, well, can't every generation say that? can't, when they moved off the farms and into the workplace, and then when the men went off to war, and then they came, and the women were in the workplace, and then when the women were in the workplace in the beginning, anyways, or where we had automation here, or we were doing that there. I mean, there's always a transition. When the kids were watching TV in the afternoon, now they're playing on computers. And I'm not saying any generation is better or worse, but there's always a continued transition.
To me, though, the issue is not the transition as much as the speed of the transition.
Yeah, and yes, that's very true.
I mean, 10,000 years before the wheel was invented, and 1,000 years we're walking on the moon. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah, I do. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's gonna whereas the pain was spread out over maybe 1 or 2 generations, I think you're going to see it compressed into such a tight time frame that I think every generation, at least for some point of time, in the near future, is going to feel extreme pain from this.
Mm-hmm. I think the difference too is that we're looking at a whole different level of change here. For example, when you juxtapose the people in general, let's say the population of the United States, their ability to perform certain tasks, to learn certain tasks, I should say, and then perform them. When you had the Industrial Revolution, you had people coming off the fields and learning how to, work a machine. It wasn't, you actually had tradesmen that were, artisans that got, that lost their jobs because we could go in there and mass produce something. The problem today is that this transition is so completely technical that everyone is not does not have the individual ability to learn some of this stuff. And I'm being honest about it. Not everyone. I couldn't be a computer programmer. I would make a lousy computer programmer. I'd make a lousy engineer. And so it's like a funnel, and that the options are narrowing rapidly. But yet we still have all these people in the funnel, that are trying to find their place. And I just don't think everyone's capable. But, before we get any further along, Paul, talk to us about a couple possibilities there with these different economies that people are postulating.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue. I'm going to kind of do this out of order from what I put in our notes. I think first, let's talk about the gig economy. Because a lot of people are already living it. And I think this is maybe kind of the transition state that we're in. And basically the gig economy is, you might call it, freelancing or, independent consulting or, something along those lines, temp work, where, an employee is brought, into an organization to do, a single task or, a single project, for a short-term period of time.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell. You see a lot of this going on right now, especially in the IT world, programmers, coders. I don't think probably as much in the hardware world, but, definitely, in the software side of the house, you see quite a bit of it. You see it in graphic design. Even my wife. My wife sells real estate. That's basically gig work. I mean, she has to go out and, find a client for every transaction she engages in. If she doesn't do a good job, she's not going to get a referral, to that client's, sphere of influence to bring more clients in. Right. So, I mean, there's, some bright spot, I guess. It kind of forces people to do their best work on a daily basis. And there's some really good things about it, like flexibility of scheduling. You take the gig or you don't. If you want to go on vacation for 2 weeks, hey, I'm going to, not going to accept this gig. One of the downsides is, though, hey, the rent is due, and I don't have a gig. What am I going to do, to get some money in the door? So, I see a lot of this kind of happening right now, across the board. And there's more and more people, even people taking side jobs.
Yeah, my kids, one of my boys is a firefighter. And, if you know any firefighters, because of their kind of crazy schedule, many of them have a second job. It's almost a full-time job. He works for a industrial plant, and he's he's an EMT, so he can provide first aid response if somebody gets hurt in the plant. So, he's got a side gig. That's he's hired to do that one specific thing.
I think there's another sort of aspect of this, too. As we move away, when we were talking about Obamacare and insurance and whose job was it? Is it your employer? Was it your government? And blah, 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 blah. And for people like me, I don't have – my employer doesn't provide me auto insurance. Why does my employer have to provide me health insurance? And we don't have pensions the way generations past did. So there isn't that sense of loyalty and I don't mean to keep dicing this up into generations, but you can see sort of the divides in the migration of social habits going along with the technology, and changing employment habits and so on, and family habits and so on. As the government tries to regulate and mandate more things, the companies are not providing, like I said, insurance too much anymore. They're not providing the pensions. They're not providing this. They're not providing that. And people of my generation are the first generation to not be in jobs for much longer than 5 years. It just doesn't happen anymore. Prior to that, people were in jobs for, they were a company man. They were a life man. They would get their gold watch at the end of their, retirement, at the retirement party. So this sort of thing, and then the advent of the computer, it's not really a surprise. And somebody who I just have such a hard time and it's probably because I was raised with cartoons in the afternoon when I didn't have a parent home. I was just watching, TV or whatever. I have such a hard time focusing on one given thing for any amount of time. So I'm always off doing multiple different projects. That's kind of like why my job right now is actually kind of good for me. And when I was working for Glenn, because I could go off in 15 directions and still kind of be interested. So it's just, I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying all of these sort of factors come together and shape how the next group of people start to do work, and what they're doing in England, getting rid of people, and so on. So
once again, though, we're talking about individual personalities, characteristics. I'm looking at Thirsty Warrior's comment and talking about consulting. You're always looking for the next gig, but the freedom's great. But I will bet the Thirsty Warrior will agree with me. A lot of people aren't cut out for that. A lot of people are not good at. They're not good at marketing themselves, and that's a requirement. You got to line up those jobs. Yeah, after a while, maybe you're in a small enough area with not a lot of competition, you'll get a lot of word of mouth. But we're talking about, somebody. If this is the economy, let's say this is all, but mostly what people are doing to stay alive. Mm-hmm. A lot of people won't be able to do it. A lot of people don't want to. You got the gaps in cash flow that everybody has to learn to live with. One of the reasons that the restaurant business, or people that buy these little cafes or whatever, almost always go under within 2 years is the fact if they get cash in, they look at it and go, look at all this cash. This must be profit. I'm going to spend it, and they don't plan for the next day. It's a whole mindset to be able to survive in a gig economy. I've done it, and it's constant pressure, even collecting. It's one thing to do a job. I've actually been stiffed on collecting when I helped somebody bag up 30 bags of leaves in their backyard, and then they wanted to. Well, they didn't stiff me, but they tried to not pay for it, and that's kind of crazy stuff you have to deal with. Not everybody can do that, and it's set up, it's cut out. So Paul, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is going to be good for some people, and some people are already doing it, but it sure won't be a replacement for the 9 to 5.
No, but that's and that's the pain I keep going back to. That is the pain, I think, and to me, there's a mindset there. It's an expectation When I went through elementary school, I was expected to learn how to write cursive. Many elementary schools now don't teach cursive; they teach keyboard skills.
Yep.
So the expectation is changed, and the people that come up growing through that education, their expectation is that they're going to be using a keyboard way more than they're going to be writing cursive. So there is definitely, to go back to 40 minutes ago, an educational component here that needs to be addressed.
People need to learn things. That's why I like homeschooling. We did it. Our kids, got their academics out of the way in 4 hours, and then I had them, and I could teach them carpentry and like how to set up electricals and all, just about everything you need to know. Some auto mechanics, and so they learned a lot of different things. And both boys the two younger boys are great at going out and doing their own stuff, building their own projects. And if I'm lucky, I'll get to go help them. But they're pretty much leading everything now. But a lot of people aren't doing it. I read an article the other day that people are learning to do less and less over time. And, people are either paying someone else to do it or, like, for example, working on a car. I can change the oil and air filter in my car. Pretty much other than that and vacuuming it out and changing the tires or a flat, I'm lost. There's just technology has come in. I used to be able to take my first two cars apart, but there's just no way. Too many gadgets in there. You need computers and everything for everything.
Sure,
So
but with the right education and tools, an auto mechanic can do it. They can plug their scanner into the car, and the car will give them, a code that says, "Hey, the mass air sensor needs to be changed," or
what about this?
It's time to change the oil. So it goes back to the education, that skill set. It's not maybe that you can't learn that. It's how resistant are you to learning that?
That's true. And our education, and that's probably something I'm going to have to bring up next week. But our education system is horrible. It doesn't prepare you for anything. We should just go ahead and let the air out of the university system for what it's worth and start over and look into the future about what people need to know, what kind of skills they need to have, and then the rest of the people can go out and get additional skills.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that one of the big four accounting firms like Ernst & Young is saying, hey, we're doing away with the university requirement. I mean, that was always, the basic minimum requirement to get into a large accounting firm was to have a degree of some sort.
Yeah, because they're going to train. But look at people that got degrees in engineering, which is, pretty much a worthless degree in terms of you being able to really get out and do anything with it other than get a job with a company that would then train you to do what they wanted you to do. I mean, it was
sure.
You got a basic education. Well, what about the sharing economy?
And that's kind of the end state, I think, of what we're looking at, or as I call the socialist utopia.
That's what Sparky was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's it's kind of a human centric. It's based on sharing. You're sharing, human resources, physical resources, such as, materials, and intellectual resources, which, I think, falls under, software and, that sort of thing. Design falls under, the intellectual resources part. And it's really, the whole thing is based upon, to go to the utopian, end of the scale. It's really based upon the fair use and access of resources without any kind of monetary exchange. So you're basically swapping your skills, or you're doing some kind of collective purchasing, ride sharing. You see something like Uber, I think, is a good example of it, or Lyft. These services where the bicycle exchanges that a lot of the big cities have, where you pick up a bike off the rack, you ride it 20 blocks down the road, you're done with it, and you leave it at another rack, and you pay a monthly fee. you're going to see, I think, microfinancing, open source stuff like Linux, I think, is the software, the computer language, is an open source concept. You can, anybody can go in, modify the code. The only requirement is that you let anybody else come in and modify the code that you just modified. Right. So, and that's really kind of, kind of the Star Trek worldview state of things where, everybody's really just working for some kind of personal satisfaction, and, your resources are available. We're seeing it come online now, 3D printing, shorten supply chains. You can, take, the plans for a prosthetic arm, which people have already done, and with a 3D printer, they can print $50 prosthetic that's workable, and actually, in many cases, better than the prosthetic that was built by a skilled craftsman somewhere. So
what's that going to do to GDP? I mean, when I think of a GDP, I think most of us think, okay, we all produce, in our industries, everything we produce a certain amount of value, and but if it's done this way, with all these shortcuts, for example, where you have pretty much what looks like my reading of it is a pure democracy. Everybody has a vote on pretty much everything. There's just not going to be a market for as many things. We talked about that earlier.
There is. The question is, what is GDP at that point? Because it's not a monetary-based system.
Yeah, exactly.
You are taking currency out. You are trading your skills. You are trading your intellectual abilities. You're trading your motivation to work. It is a complete 180 from where we are now, where you trade your time for someone else's money.
Okay, get ready for it. You ready? I disagree.
Has anybody got a mute button for that guy? Who is that? Oh, by the way, for the people...
Yeah, he's been awfully quiet. So
I'm listening.
I've been waiting with bated breath.
Well, here's why I disagree, because everything you just described with the the bicycles in the cities and all of it, every last bit of that, what you were describing, was an exchange of something of value for another thing of value.
Right.
Monetarily, money, I'm not talking in terms of value. Money, the actual physical currency, or whether it be digits or whatnot, is just a representation of value, which is why currency will not go away, because it's just easier to transfer a currency as a representation of your value. Whereas trading of goods is more of a barter. So I have an hour of my time that I will give you in exchange for this fish. That's bartering. But that doesn't work anywhere ever, only because I have a herd of elephants, and that's not easy to transport with me. So that's where money, actual currency, comes into play. It's just a representation of those elephants in a smaller, more easily transported way.
You're saying it won't work, or
what I'm saying is that what Paul is describing is basic capitalism. It has no effect on reducing the GDP in any way, because you're still describing an exchange of goods, one for another, and we're just using currency as a medium to do that exchange.
Where's the profitability? And that's what's missing.
No, because profitability is still there.
And it goes where?
Well, if you're paying the bike company $5 a month and it costs them $4.99 to put the bike there, they have a penny of profitability. And you absolutely must have profitability in order to sustain any business model. You literally cannot have a truly non-profit exchange. You have to have a monetary gain. Otherwise, you will not survive.
You haven't heard of Amtrak, have you?
That's a negative revenue.
But
That's a good example of what you're talking about.
But you're also talking about current state economics. If everybody's on that same system, maybe you would have money, maybe alternative. You would have to measure that money differently,
right?
Than it currently is.
In order to break away from that, where we're actually going, okay, well, what is GDP? In order for that to occur, you have to have the lack of exchange of goods. It will become a one-way deal where what I was saying with automation, if robots did everything for us, then it would be a one-way exchange. They give and we do not give back. There is no reciprocal to keep them going. It is a one-way exchange. That would destroy GDP, that would destroy currency, that would change everything. But the very moment you have an exchange of one thing of value for another, you're right back to the same thing that we have now, which is, I work, you work, and we'll exchange our goods. It's no matter what way you cut it, it's still a capitalist society.
I think the governments would agree with you in that they would want to maintain some type of currency because there's no way to tax this system as effectively as they can tax a linear system.
Well, even at that, they wouldn't need tax.
Right. Sorry, go.
Yeah, there would be no need for tax at that point because if the robots are exchanging everything towards the government for all the government services, they don't then need taxes to sustain themselves.
You're talking about governments.
Yeah, well,
okay, yeah. So my point is that there's going to be the transition Paul talked about. You're being fair with this because we're talking about this being the end all of utopia. Yeah, at this point in time, there would be very little need for any of that. I mean, there would no supervision, everything. But let me tell you why this won't work, and it didn't have a lot to do with the other. It's that everyone is not equal in their willingness to participate in producing things. And so what do you do with those people? Right now, we subsidize them. There would be no government to subsidize them. So the pressure would be on each person. So when I was reading this, Paul, I was humming Kumbaya and, thinking about the flowers that are going to be blooming pretty soon. But the truth of the matter is that these people that say, okay, everybody gets a fair vote in this, they're going to turn on anyone, just like they used to do in the communes. If somebody quit working, the hippies would throw them out. It's like, you can't just sit there and smoke weed. You're going to have to go over and hoe that garden.
Even the communes. Even in the communes, it was a capitalist society. You are exchanging your labor for the right to exist there, and you get food, but you have to work. It's still a exchange of goods.
Yeah, you really almost need a complete, mental shift, to reach that end state.
I agree.
Where the basic drivers of why you work and what you do, are going to be completely different.
I agree with
than they are today.
Now, Paul.
So you're talking about creating values, essentially, right?
Exactly. Yes.
But I think the thing is, we're talking. I think it is there with a lot of people. These people that do believe in open source and these people that do the bike sharing, they do have place a very different value on their abilities and what they put out in the world versus what we did or what your grandparents did. It's changing. They look at things in a very different way than we do. Going back to the 3D printer, they don't place the same value on certain things the way past generations do. And you'll probably have a better way to put it.
I mean, you have to redefine wealth.
Right. And they are. We see it one way, they'll see it differently. Younger kids a traditional brick and mortar, just as a rudimentary sort of example, a traditional brick and mortar need to go to a job at an office where you could sit on your bed and with your laptop and do the exact same stuff. They don't think in those terms like we used to have to get up and go to school, go to work. So they think I can do this here. Why bother? So there is a shift, and on that, we've come to the end of our show.
Well, I had more fun than you did. That's all I can say. Yeah, it's been a good week, and next week we'll come back with hopefully more things to think about and scratch your head about. Maybe talk about some of the things we already did. I had a good time. I hope everybody comes back next week.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening, all. Bye.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Spark
If
Diddy.
you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths.
This is the TK Radio Network.